I just got back from seeing Once in concert, which was a one-night-only show at the London Palladium based on the movie written and directed by John Carney, and the concert starred Jamie Muscato and Carrie Fletcher. So two very big West End heavy hitters basically taking on this theatrical adaptation of that story and featuring songs that you might be familiar with, such as Falling Slowly. I think that's probably the biggest one from it. Google it, listen to like 10 seconds. There's a good chance that you've heard it at some point. And this was my first ever West End concert. I've obviously been to concerts before, but I haven't been to a West End concert which was done in this manner. Like, my internal image of what a concert might be in the West End would be basically all of the cast sitting on stools and singing from there and not really much else. I wasn't expecting dialogue in between. I was just expecting the music. But thankfully, I was completely wrong about that. At least for this, I don't know if this is how it always is. I doubt that it's always like this, but they put quite a lot of effort into a lot of other aspects of the production. Like, it was staged to be very theatrical. There was loads of interstitial dialogue. There was custom specific lighting for it. Like, they really tried to contribute to this despite the fact that it wasn't a fully fleshed out thing. There were several things that I really liked. There were also some things that I didn't really understand or that seemed a bit weird or confusing. So let's get into it. But first, let's just give you a little bit of background as to what the sort of story is of the show. More or less, there's a guy in Dublin who's down in the dumps, and there's a girl in Dublin who's Czech, she's not Irish, and they meet and bond over music, essentially, and she encourages him to follow his dreams because he's very musical, and it then becomes apparent that he has an old love interest who's in the US, and she has a husband, and so as they continue to bond through the show and fall in love, sort of, with one another, they also are being pulled apart by the fact that they've got these two other lives that are so distinct. And so the show is sort of about them juggling that, falling in love and then having to fall out of love because they shouldn't have been in love in the first place, kind of. And what that Irish and Czech kind of fusion means for the music is you get some stuff that feels a lot more Czech and some stuff that feels a lot less Czech. And to make that a lot more convincing, the musicians playing were on the stage, and so we had 2 guitars, 2 banjos, 2 violins, a cello, and a drummer, I think. Maybe one more, I'm not sure. Some of those supporting cast are just musicians. They pretty much have no speaking lines, while others were various characters, a shopkeeper or a flatmate and things like that. And I really liked how they were on stage pretty much the entire time, playing music, and some really beautiful music as well, especially those strings, hearing those violins playing while they were singing these sometimes very beautiful songs was really nice. And then it means that they can get up and have a jump around and dance around while they're playing some of the sort of more upbeat Czech numbers. But it wouldn't have been a concert without Jamie Muscato and Carrie Fletcher taking on those main roles, and they both did a really fantastic job. Those two have some really nice on-stage chemistry that I was really enjoying through the entire show. Carrie delivered some really funny lines, and Jamie's reaction to them just made it even more funny. And they both sort of sold what they were trying to aim for, I think, very convincingly. That stuff was really good. They've also obviously both got phenomenal voices, and so being able to just witness that, aside from everything else, was really enjoyable. And at times, it did mean that they sort of outshone, I think, some of the other folks that were on stage in that supporting cast. And I don't mean this in really a negative way for the other folks that were there. It's just that Carrie and Jamie are completely unbelievable in the way that they were performing some of these songs, and just in general, they're very incredibly talented people. And so putting anyone sort of up against them is always going to be a tall order, right? Still, no particular flaws with anyone's performance on stage. I thought that everyone did a really good job. But they did a good job with what they could, but the fact that they were trying to go above and beyond and make it less concerty and feel a little bit more like a fully fledged production meant that in certain areas, I wasn't sure whether I should be giving them the benefit of the doubt for something being unclear, or if I should be holding them to the standard of being a little bit more fully fledged and me not understanding it being a negative. Does that make sense? There were 1 or 2 moments in the show where something happened that was a plot development of some kind, even if it was just a small one. And I found myself going, okay, hold on. I wish there was a little more clarity as to what's actually happening in this moment, because they would very quickly have to move from a song to a little bit of talking to a song. And in certain instances, that meant that I just didn't realize that, for example, characters were in different places to one another at certain times. I'm sure this is something that some people interpreted just fine from the way that they staged it. Essentially, they had a piano that was fixed in position on a platform, and then they had a few chairs at the front, a couple of chairs at the sides where the musicians sat when they weren't dancing around on the main stage. And that was pretty much it. There wasn't really anything else to the set. And then occasionally they had some lighting that would project down to show water. And I thought at one point it was meant to be representing a boat, but it wasn't. That was just me getting that wrong. But I think the idea was that it was representing the coast essentially, and them looking out over the water and thinking about going to America and stuff like that. Now, I suspect that the director, Dean Johnson, and the musical director, Adam Hoskins, were kind of aware of some of the ambiguity that might come across in the way that they were staging it. And as such, inside the program, you've got this full synopsis of everything in the show, which I've never seen before. I don't know if this is common for concert versions of things, but it's really damn useful, because I can now look back at a scene and go, okay, there was a little bit of nuance here that I just missed because everything was a bit static. It wasn't necessarily super clear always exactly how things were working. For example, there was one scene where the mother of Carrie's character, who's unnamed, she's just girl and Jamie is guy. Her mother is basically warning Jamie's character that he shouldn't be fearful. He needs to be brave in life, more or less. And she gives this fairly rousing little monologue for maybe 60, 90 seconds or so. And then Jamie says, huh? What did she say? And Carrie's character says something like, oh, she was just wishing you good luck. Like something like that. And I didn't realize in the moment that what they were meaning for to be happening there is that the mother was actually speaking Czech. And so Jamie didn't understand it because it was all in Czech. It wasn't in English. But she said it in English. And I just didn't understand that they were trying to kind of give the illusion of the language barrier there. I suspect that in a full-on production of this, maybe they would have her speak Czech and there would be some other way of presenting that information to the audience. Maybe there'd be subtitles for all I know. I mean, I just got back from seeing Phaedra and there were subtitles for that. So it's possible. Not common, but it's possible. And so there were half a dozen or so things like that having now read this synopsis, I've been like, oh, right, okay, that's kind of rounding things out for me. And that normally, had they just been on stools, like I wouldn't have minded not being able to follow it as easily. But because they were doing so well in showing everything, I'm like, okay, well, in that case, there are a few moments that I didn't think weren't so clear. I'm not trying to be overly critical here. I thought that they went above and beyond from my perspective, and I thought they did a great job. The story itself, though, I don't know if it really was for me. Or maybe a better way to put it is, I just don't think that it came full circle and landed with the emotional heft that I think it should have done. This may, again, just be because it was a concert version and the songs alone combined with what dialogue they did include didn't quite contain enough information for you to really sort of piece together all of the emotional arcs of everything. Like, for example, towards the start of the show, Carrie says you must always say hello to the piano. And it's like, okay, it's just like a silly little gag where Jamie's character then has to say, okay, hello to the piano. And it's cute, but it never goes anywhere. And it's the sort of thing that in any full-scale production would 100% be tied back to at some point. There would be some kind of little moment there where he would say hello to the piano just of his own accord and it would make Carrie's character happy or something. Like some random thing like that. Or just like a little thing like he's just more familiar with it. He gives it like a friendly tap when he walks in the room or whatever, right? That you just expect there to be maybe like 20 little tiny threads like that through a show that end up in combination contributing to your feeling of a character's growth and progress and their journey from beginning to end. But I just didn't really get that in almost all cases in this show. There were one or two tiny little moments, like Jamie's character at one point gives a bunch of money to a guy that runs a shop in the town who kind of befriended him at the start of the show. Sort of, they were on maybe slightly hostile terms, but ended up coming around. That's like some emotional growth, and that's a journey that I can see the beginning and end of, and it's fine, and it's great. There's maybe also some irony there with the fact that the shopkeeper thinks that he's free of capitalism, and he's really sort of pushing back against all of that stuff. but he owns a shop. And they comment on that in the show. And then he receives this money from Jamie at the end. Again, sorry, I'm saying Jamie here. His name is just Guy because he doesn't have a name. But he takes the money and he sort of accepts it. And so maybe there's some commentary that you could pull out of that too. So there were some aspects of that present, but I got to the end of the concert and I didn't really feel, and I'm going to go into spoiler territory here for a moment, like the love-struck nature of Jamie and Carrie's characters with one another really manifested enough for me to then be heartbroken when each of them went back to their own previous lives and didn't give their new love a chance to flourish. Like, they never have any real intimacy in the show, which is fine. I'm not saying like, oh man, I wish they were ripping each other's clothes. No, obviously not. But there's very little actual connection shown between them, weirdly. Carrie's character at one point says, I love you in Czech, and the translation for that was done by projecting onto the boxes at the sides of the theatre and the roof area above the theatre stage itself, the words I love you in cursive, like massive as well, to the point that I couldn't actually fully read what they said because it was really hard to make it out amongst the texture of the box itself that it was projected onto. But there's that, and they have a little bit of conflict in their relationship, with very, very clear bunny fingers there, with accusations of like, oh, you're pushing me away, and it's like, oh, well, you've already got like a lover in the US, and like all those sorts of things. And then saying things like we never had something, we never started something, and Jamie's character saying, well, I thought we did, I thought this was the beginning. And like, saying that now, I'm sure you feel like there could be room for that to be really romantic and tragic, but in the concert itself, it just didn't really feel like that connection that was a maybe became a, yeah, that's there. And so it's not a great loss when it goes away again. The only thing really that I'd heard about once going into this was that it was sad. I didn't know if that was just an especially sad scene or that there was just a sad kind of overall sentiment. I wasn't sure. But coming away from this, I can see analytically where the sadness should have been, but I didn't feel like that was imparted to me today. And again, it's a concert version of a show I'm not familiar with, so those cast, crew, and everyone putting it together have not had an easy task in winning me over today, and I give them 100% kind of benefit of the doubt in all areas for this. Like, I'm aware that I'm probably the odd one out in going to see a concert reading of a show that I've not seen before, don't really know the music for bar one or two songs, and haven't seen the movie for. And so all of my critique here is meant to be the sort of most light critique in the world. Like, I don't think any of this is really serious issues necessarily. I just thought it would be worth mentioning that I did think there were some gaps for me personally, which is feedback that maybe they'd find useful to hear if they do consider going on and giving this an actual run in the West End at some point, maybe later this year. Now, there are two more things I want to address, one being a real positive and then one being, weirdly, a real negative. The positive is within the staging that I've already mentioned I really appreciated because, like I said, I thought it was just going to be stools and that's that. There were some really lovely moments where they essentially had choreography kind of coming in that felt like they had done it just out of sheer enjoyment and love for the show. There's one moment actually that comes to mind here when both guy and girl are in a bar or a pub of some kind, and there's an open mic and Guy is singing, and he's singing this really heartfelt song, and initially it seems like, okay, maybe the bar are kind of not going to pay too much attention to him, like the people that are there, but it ends up completely enrapturing all of them. They're all glued to Jamie's performance, and as that happens, they start to move around in the space and they end up forming a line as they're playing and supporting him singing too, a line straight to Carrie where she's sitting, her character girl is sitting. And it was just really nice. Like, it's not necessarily high intellectual symbolism there, like man is singing a love song and they form a line to woman who is being sung to. Like, come on. I'm not pretending that that's super deep. I'm just saying that I really actually was touched by that. I thought that it was really nice. And the fact that they went to those lengths to bother to choreograph all of that movement on the stage at that particular point was really appreciated. Thumbs up. And that happened throughout the show. Loads of moments like that. For example, even at the very beginning, Carrie coming on stage as girl and starting to talk to Jamie as guy, and him saying that he's a Hoover repairman, and then someone else from the cast just slyly bringing a Hoover onto stage, and Carrie instantly turning around and saying, oh, would you look at that? I have a Hoover right here. Like, they really created some physical comedy there that was fantastic, and that could so easily have just not been there. The Hoover could have just been on the stage. So that was really fantastic, and I admired all the choices they made in that regard. The negative, though, and this confused me quite a lot, and I gave them the benefit of the doubt during, but since then I've been like, the sound. And I'm not just talking about like the speakers in the Palladium, nor am I talking about like mics scratching, things like that. That stuff was all fine. I'm talking about whoever was like on the sound desk doing the mixing, or maybe it was just the mics themselves that they were using. Either way, certain characters kept having their mic just be off. So for example, there's a scene where the mother of Carrie's character is just doing some talking with the others, and her mic was just off for the entire scene. It wasn't long, 60, 90 seconds, something like that, but her mic was just off. And I'm so used to, in the West End, that happening here and there for the first half of a sentence, maybe. But this was over a minute, and then it kind of came in a little bit, and then it went again. And that kept happening through the show. And I don't get why. At first, I was like, oh, it's just the sound tech who's muted a character because someone else is talking or making noise or whatever, and they want to keep the audio clear. But then when it didn't come back, it was like, hello? Like, why is this taking such a long time to fix? And the reason I gave them the benefit of the doubt during the show is that I was like, well, it's a concert version and this is the first time that they've performed it, so there's going to be some kind of wobbles with the tech, I would imagine. But then afterwards I was like, well, hold on. It was so persistent through the whole thing, and they would surely have a script there in front of them showing when certain characters' mics might need to be muted or whatever. Like, I don't know exactly how it works, but that's all going to be blocked out, I'm sure. And so if for entire sections of the production, mics were just off here, does that maybe mean that the tech itself was failing and there was nothing they could do about it? I don't know. It's the Palladium and they do stuff like this all the time, so you wouldn't expect their tech to stop working. And it wasn't like there was such an outrageous amount of movement or complexity to what was happening on stage that would justify tech failing that way, so I don't know what the deal was. It's not something that I think is going to be a problem in the future, but still, what was that, guys? Either way, those are my thoughts on Once in Concert. I would really like to see it come to the West End at some point, because I'd really like to see what this book and score is capable of once produced in a fully fledged capacity. I've only seen it at half power so far, sort of thing. So fingers crossed we do get to see it at some point, and hopefully you've enjoyed my thoughts here too.